your attention, please. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Don Fertman.
All right.
What's going on? Yeah.
You know, it's great to be here, and it's great to be in recovery, and it's great to be on the Blacklist because, you know, we can talk about recovery, we can talk about substance use disorder, we can talk about, I guess, whatever we want to talk about, because that's what the Blacklist is all about. Is that right?
Absolutely. So let's go into real quick about how I found you. So, believe it or not, Undercover Boss. I love the show. I watch it all the time. One day I was just sitting there rewatching it, and Subway comes on, you know. And so I saw I saw the episode. But really what got me was the part where you were talking about being in recovery. And that right there, I was just like, wow. I don't know, for some reason, there's something just got me, and I was like, I got to reach out to this guy. So, I mean, I found you on Facebook, added you on Facebook, and then I don't think I really reached out for a while, but I did do my research, you know, I saw it and I found you there. And, it's just, it was really cool because even though I don't know if did they try to censor you from talking about being in recovery on the show at all?
They were actually very open to me talking about that.
Okay.
It was one of those things where I didn't know I was necessarily going to talk about that. That was kind of in the back of my mind.
Okay.
And, you know, there's always that fear of, well, aren't we supposed to be anonymous? Aren't we supposed to not talk about this?
Right.
And then I was like, wait a minute. That's what the stigma is, and it's time to overcome the stigma.
Right.
And it was just at a point where that stigma was starting to become overcome.
Okay. All right. Yeah, and I thought it was really cool though, just to be able to kind of just, even though it was brief, to be able to throw that out on national TV, you know?
Yeah, and it was actually amazing because right after the show aired, I started getting calls and emails and people contacting me saying, you know, hey, you know, you're a big cheese at Subway, and you've helped Subway to grow from, you know, 166 stores to 40,000, and you're in recovery. So could you help our organization to grow? And, you know, I listened to a lot of folks and looked at what they were doing and realized, well, you know, everybody's got an idea and everybody's got an opportunity to grow their organization, but I only have so much time.
Right.
And there was one particular guy who was the brother of the founder of the Phoenix, and which was an organization. They had a location in Denver, and they had a few chapters in Denver, but they had a great way of helping people find recovery through sober active community. And I flew out to Denver and I met with the folks, and, you know, I heard what they were doing. And I ended up joining their board of directors. And after a while, I ended up chairing the board. But most importantly, I became a volunteer because we created a volunteer program so that we could start spreading the message of the Phoenix and the message of recovery all around the country. And now, instead of just being in Colorado, the Phoenix is in 46 states and 100 communities, and somewhere in the neighborhood of 270,000 people have participated in Phoenix programs. And we're also in Canada and England now. So the word is getting out there, but you know what? It's still not enough, right? I mean,
Right.
you know, there are 40 plus million people that are suffering from substance use disorder. We got a lot of work to do.
Right. Well, I mean, we're on the subject. Like I said, there's no formal conversation here. You know, if we're on the subject, tell us a little bit more about the Phoenix since we're on it.
Yeah, the Phoenix. When I talk about sober active community, what we do is we hold free events, and the operative word there is free, and the other operative word is community, sober active community. Basically, anybody can come to any Phoenix event as long as they have 48 hours of clean time.
Okay.
And we have folks that come to Phoenix events and plug in and get to know the other folks in the Phoenix, and they start to get connected. They get connection, they get community, and they start their recovery process. Other folks might come to an event, then go back out, get another 48 hours, come back, do some more, and eventually get connected. But the main thing is that they get an opportunity to see what recovery is all about and to see what people look like when they're in recovery, and understand that when you find recovery, the possibilities are unlimited. We can do anything. Once we find recovery, once we put down our substance of choice, booze or drugs or whatever it happens to be, we have an opportunity to live a wonderful life. And with the Phoenix, we can live a sober, active lifestyle in recovery. Our events include yoga, we have CrossFit, we have hiking, we've gotten now into music. We've branched out into a whole music program. We're at a lot of festivals where we create safe, sober spaces. And I just, right before I saw you, I was on the Phoenix Songwriting Workshop, which happens to be virtual. And anybody can join the songwriting workshop. You don't have to know anything about writing music. It's all about folks enjoying music together and being creative together and learning together. And it's virtual and it's free. And all people have to do is go to the App Store and download the Phoenix app.
I'm definitely gonna have to talk to you about that, because I'm a musician myself. I've been making music since I was, 14 years old, and so I focus on a lot of recovery based music, and so I love music. I play a lot of instruments, so we're definitely gonna have to talk about that.
Excellent. So you better join us next Tuesday night.
Okay,
I'll give
I
you
will.
I'll give you the info, and then you can come down to my studio here. I got some drums back here that need playing.
There we go. Yeah, see, I'm definitely excited to I've heard about the Phoenix, and I've been wanting to kind of get a little bit more info about it, because, like you said, now that they're expanding, I'm in Western New York, by Rochester, Buffalo. So it'd be nice, if they have something, in the areas.
Yeah, we're expanding all the time, and basically all you have to do, the best thing about the Phoenix is all you have to do is come to one event. So come to the songwriting workshop next Tuesday, join us and have some fun, and then you can also sign up to become a volunteer.
Okay.
And we can bring you through that process, and then you can reach out and get other people to join you in doing recovery events. Whatever it is that you enjoy doing, you can
Right.
do it with the Phoenix, under the Phoenix umbrella, and create a community right there in where you're located in Rochester.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, so let's back up. So why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, just kind of about your story, and we'll go from there.
Sure. When I think about my story, there are a couple of key points, and one of them is I was the child of two crazy alcoholic parents. And when I say crazy alcoholic parents, I spent a good portion of my childhood, watching dishes fly, hearing yelling and screaming and words that, a 5-year-old kid or 3-year-old kid should not hear. I had, watching my parents actually get into fist fights. I'd go to bed at night and put the pillow over my head, and I would just wish for it to stop. Please stop. Just stop. And it didn't stop. My parents drank and drank and drank. And ultimately, my mom left my dad. We moved down to Florida for a while with my mom. She got even crazier down there. I had a little brother. He and I decided to move back to Connecticut with my dad. It was just as bad, no matter where we were, we couldn't escape alcoholism. And I observed my dad and I observed my mom, and I said, man, when they drink, they're such miserable people. I will never drink. And guess what? You know,
Drink.
the same old story, man. It's like I will not drink, and instead I discovered marijuana, and I started smoking pot, and that worked great for a while because it got me to escape and get out of myself. When you grow up with alcoholic parents, I ended up very isolated. We didn't have friends over to the house for fear of what was going to happen, because you never knew what kind of explosion would take place. I went out to friends' houses now and then, but I didn't really have a lot of friends because I felt very alone and very ashamed of what was going on at home. And we moved around a lot because my dad kept losing jobs. So every 2 years we'd move someplace else. It's hard to keep friends when you're a kid and you're moving every 2 years.
Right.
So fast forward to when I was in high school and I discovered the joys of cannabis, and I was able to now escape in my head some of that isolation and that fear and that dread and those feelings that I grew up with, those feelings of isolation and being alone and thinking that I'm the only one in the world who feels like this. And once I got stoned the first couple of times, it was like I could laugh and I could just experience life. And this is great, until it wasn't. I ended up getting busted. I ended up spending a night in jail in Bridgeport, Connecticut, which is one of the worst jails ever. And after that, every time I got stoned, I got paranoid.
Yeah.
But then I went to college and got involved in building a college radio station. I was the founder of WNHU 88.7 on your FM dial at the University of New Haven. And as I actually built it with hammer and nails. And one night the guys were going out, and I was kind of a long-haired hippie freak at the time. Again, very isolated, keeping to myself. But they invited me to go out for pizza and beer. And I wanted to make friends. I wanted to fit in. So I said, okay, give me one of those Millers. They were drinking Miller beers. So I drank a Miller beer. And, in the back of my mind, I was, thinking, yeah, my dad's a miserable son of a bitch, but one Miller won't hurt. Then I took the second Miller. And I felt a little better. And then the third Miller came and the magic happened. And somewhere right in the middle of that third Miller, all of a sudden, I felt like life is good at last. I don't have fear. I don't have to be afraid. I don't have to be alone. I don't have to have those feelings of dread and doom. I can actually just be myself, even though I didn't know who I was, because I had been hiding out so long, but I could just be myself. And I spent the next 10 years chasing that feeling and trying to get that third Miller feeling over and over and over again. So when I was during college, we formed a rock and roll band, and I ended up playing music professionally for 5 years after I got out of college.
And it was the crayons, right?
The crayons, right? Yeah, you see, I've got an orange crayon back there because I was the orange crayon. Right?
Yeah, that picture is it's pretty funny.
Yeah.
It's taking pictures with a bunch of giant crayons.
Yeah, exactly. So as I say, it's I was the orange crayon. We each of us had a color. It was like the new wave era, so we were like a new wave band. So
Okay.
I dyed my hair orange. I wore orange clothes. I drove an orange Volkswagen Rabbit, and I lived in Orange, Connecticut.
Oh wow.
I'm not
You were
kidding.
dedicated. You were dedicated to that.
You're right. I had to move to Orange, Connecticut. So,
wow.
so I was in the band until I wasn't, and I ended up out of the band because the band realized that I was showing up late to practice, and I was getting sloppy on stage, and I was a mess because my drinking had continued. I was still trying to chase that third Miller feeling, but the third Miller feeling kept eluding me. You know, I'd get to it, but I wanted to keep it. So I'd have another and another and another, and then a gin and tonic, and then a shot, then some tequila. And it would get worse and worse and worse. And I'd keep going past it and going right off the cliff. And so night after night, I would get smashed. You know, the great thing about being in a rock and roll band is you play a lot of bars and they give you a lot of free drinks. So I had a lot of free drinks and ended up getting myself into a lot of trouble and ended up being booted from a band that I had founded. And here's
Like,
something very...
Did they all... Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just saying, did they all drink or was it just you?
Yeah, I mean, everybody had a few drinks. Everybody,
you were just out of
you
control.
know, smoked a little. Everybody snorted a little.
Okay.
I had a lot of drinks and I snorted a lot. You know,
Okay.
that's just it. I thought like, hey, I'm just the same as these guys, but actually, I was doing a lot more than those guys. So they had every right to kick me out. And I remember that night that they brought me to a diner. It was like 2 a.m. or something. It was after a gig, and we went to this diner, and they were like, you know, you could tell they were very nervous. And they said, you know, Don, you know, we think that I was also involved in another band at the time. It was more of a recording project. It was called The Bats. The album is called How Pop Can You Get? Look up The Bats, How Pop Can You Get on Spotify. And you can hear it's a great album. It was reviewed very favorably in Billboard magazine. We had a video on HBO Video Jukebox, but that's another story. But they said, why don't you go do The Bats? We don't need you in the crayons anymore. And I thought, and this has happened to me a number of times, I thought this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me in my life. And guess what? It ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me, because the band used to do jingles for Subway. We used to write songs for Subway that got played on the radio, you know, songs about Subway sandwiches. And we'd tour around and we'd play these Subway jingles. And that was sort of our biggest hit. Play the Subway song. And people would love when we played the Subway song. And so I was very connected to the head of marketing for Subway. And when they kicked me out of the band, he gave me a call and he said, hey, you know, I know you have a college degree and I know you're good at writing. Would you like to come and do public relations and maybe sell some franchises and maybe do some editing of our publication and maybe be the company photographer? Because, you know, it was a little tiny company then.
Right.
I didn't have any better offers. So I said, yeah, sure. And I started on a business career, which I thought I was a complete and utter failure. I had to put on a tie and I had to go sit at a desk. And guess what? I became my father. You know, I watched him, you know, come home at night with his tie loosened, and he'd go and he'd be drinking his vodka. Guess what? By the end of the next 2 years, I was coming home, loosening my tie and drinking vodka, and I was a miserable son of a bitch, just like my father.
So were you a functioning alcoholic at that point? You could say that?
Yes, I was functioning because I did go to work. You know, that was it. You know, it's like I would get up in the morning and I would pour myself a little bit of orange juice and a lot of vodka, and I'd drink it down. Sometimes it would come back up and I'd have to drink another one. Mostly it stayed down. I was pretty successful at that. And that was just to get myself to work. And then I'd sneak out at lunchtime and I'd go get some peppermint schnapps, because that way when I came back to work, I'd have minty breath. And then when I got out of work, I'd stop by the soda machine and I'd get a Coke and I'd dump out, you know, 3/4 of the Coke, get to my car, reach under the seat, get my bottle of Majorska cheap vodka and pour it into my soda can. And that would be my drink just to get me home. And that's the life I was living for 2 years, working at Subway, you know, day after day after dark, dreary day. And I will tell you, it just felt like a car crash in slow motion. It was like this feeling of impending doom was all around me. And I just knew something bad was going to happen. I just didn't know when. And guess what? I ended up becoming isolated all over again, except now I'm not a little kid trying to isolate from my friends and my crazy parents. Now I'm an adult and I'm trying to isolate from anybody that I work with or that I know, because I didn't want them to find out my secret, which was I was drinking morning, noon, and night, and I couldn't stop.
Yeah. I mean, I've never been an alcoholic, I'll be honest with you. That wasn't my vice, but growing up, family members and friends and whatnot. So I could only imagine how that is. I couldn't. I was a functioning addict, but that was me when I was on opiates, so that's a whole nother ball game.
It is. It's another ball game, but in some ways it's the same ball game because we shared feelings. We shared feelings that we tried to erase through our drug of choice, whether it was alcohol or opiates.
Yeah.
I was trying to quell those feelings of isolation and aloneness and, feelings of inadequacy and insecurity. I was trying to drink that stuff away,
Right.
and opiates, you're trying to numb your feelings, right? You're just trying to make the
Right.
world go away. And it's really the same. It's a different drug. It's a different procedure. It gives a different kind of high, but the end is
It
the
all
same.
does the same. It does the same, yeah.
And the damn stuff every time turns against us. What
Yeah.
we think is our friend, this thing that takes away those feelings, that makes us feel comfortable in our own skin, starts to turn against us.
Right.
And I started to feel more, and I've started to feel worse than I ever felt before, except now I had to drink, and the drink didn't
Mhm.
work anymore. The
Yep.
drugs didn't work anymore. It doesn't work anymore. It stopped working. I watched my dad drink himself to death. He died at the age of 63, lying on a couch with a bowl of chickpeas and a bottle of vodka. And the
Wow.
chickpeas, because that's the only thing he could swallow, as he wasted away to nothing. I was very fortunate and blessed that my mom got sober just before I did. And I was able to spend 2.5 wonderful sober years with her. She lived in New York City, and she and I spoke at meetings together in Manhattan, and it was an awesome 2.5 years until she died of lung cancer, because she smoked. She smoked like
Yeah.
mad, so she died of lung cancer. But it was just this constant, downward spiral. And it doesn't make any difference what it was I was drinking or using. The addiction had taken hold. I had an alcoholic brain. I had an addictive brain. I was just on the road to doom. That feeling of impending doom was very accurate, because something had to give. Something had to give. And I didn't know if it was going to be death. I didn't know if
Right.
it was going to be institutionalization. I didn't know where I was going to end up. I just had the feeling I was coming to a very, very bad end.
Right. I mean, I think one of the best feelings ever in the world, is to be able to experience being sober, especially with your parents. If, like, for me, like, my mom, she was an addict, and same with me, and we both got sober around the same time. And that's like the most amazing thing, like the most amazing feeling ever, is just, you know, we were both addicts, and now all of a sudden we're able to live life sober together.
That is so cool. There's something we have in common, that we got sober together with our moms.
Yeah.
and we had that time together. You know, I was just sad that my mom, when she died, she was 56.
Young.
She died young. My dad was 63, and he, as I said, he died of this disease, and he died when I was 2 months sober, and that was tough. You know, it's tough. That's the thing about, you know, I know when I first was listening to you talk about the Blacklist and what it's about, and talking about things that we don't normally talk about. And that's one of the things we don't talk about, is how this insidious disease, how, I'm taking a drink, that drink's going into me, but it's affecting all the people around me. You know, my parents, they were taking the drinks, and it was affecting me. It destroyed my childhood. Then here I am taking the drinks, and it's affecting all the people around me that I care about. So that the disease, the addiction, affects all the people that we love, and it's not just the person that's destroying themselves, it's the lives that they're destroying around them.
Right. So you take the job at Subway, you live the, you live that repeating cycle for 2 years. It's only a matter of time before they find out, right? Before something happened, before.
Yeah, and let me tell you about that day. It was exactly, it was, I'll tell you the date. It was June 6th, 1983. And a couple of days before that, I had been at a reunion of that radio station. I mentioned, we built this radio station, and I had been at this reunion, and first of all, I went to the reunion, half in the, having my vodka, and getting to the reunion and trying to act like I had myself together. But the reality was inside, and I thought they could all see inside of me. Inside, I felt like a complete failure. I was not the rock star that I was becoming when I knew all these guys at the radio station. Here it is, 10 years later, we're having a reunion, and now I'm like my dad with a tie, sitting at a desk, and I'm a complete failure. But I had to pretend like I was successful. And the last thing I remember that night when we had this reunion was I was in a bathroom at a restaurant they were at. It was this dark, dingy bathroom, and I'm in the stall, kneeling in front of the toilet, and I'm snorting a line of Coke off the toilet seat. And as I snort the line of Coke, I throw up, and I'm like, oh shit! Now I have to go back and get another drink because I just wasted that one. And as I left that toilet, that bathroom, I went into a blackout. And it wasn't until many years later I got together with those same friends many years later. This is just, like a few years ago.
Right.
And one of the guys who was there that night said, that night of that reunion, I had the feeling that something was the matter with you, and you had a little too much to drink, because we tried to take your keys from you, and you argued with us and said you were fine and insisted on driving. I have no memory of this at all. And so he said, you got into your car and I got into my car, and I decided I was going to follow you so that to make sure that you got home safely. And he said, I had to stop when you were going down Route 1 at 2 a.m. at 75 miles an hour. And I was out of my mind. I was completely out of my mind. It was like a scene out of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. I was like just wired, and I was drunk, and I was in a complete blackout. And I woke up that next morning, and I had no idea where I was or how I got there. And the following day, I went to work after getting my vodka down and getting into the office, and feeling like a failure and feeling that now all my old friends knew that I was a failure and that I was just not, I did not become the rock star that I was supposed to be. And I was ashamed, and I was filled with remorse, and I hated myself. And I go into the office and I sit down, and this story I always tell because it's just, I just, as I picture it in my mind, I sat down and there was a jelly donut on my desk, and my boss came over to me, and everybody that was there, they all heard it as he asked me a question. I'm sitting at my desk, and he comes over and he stands over me, and I look up, and in my mind, they said he asked me a question, but in my mind, he started yelling at me. And I stood up and I screamed at the top of my lungs, "You're right, I'm a fuck up." And I took the jelly donut and I threw it against the wall and watched it slide down slowly, just like my life. And once again, as I left that office and felt like the back of my brain was going into shards, as I left that office, I felt like this is it. The secret's out. The thing I didn't want anybody to know, that I couldn't stop drinking and that I was a failure and that I was miserable. Now I just screamed it at the top of my lungs. I'm a fuck up and everybody knows. And I got into my car and I thought, once again, the worst day of my life. And guess what? It ended up being the best day of the life, right? It was the worst of times. Right. It was the best of times because it was my bottom. And that afternoon, through a whole series of circumstances, I ended up in rehab. And that was the date of my last drink, June 6th, 1983. So in June, I just celebrated 40 years. Holy crap, am I old?
I thought I'd give you a clap. It's awesome. Now, with you going to rehab, was that something that that Subway set up for you? Or was that something you did on your own?
They did not. I did it on my own because, this denial is, well, you know this, denial is deep.
Yeah.
And my denial was so deep that I believed, as I was driving away from Subway, and just on a side note, I'm driving away from Subway and I'm in this little black Ford EXP, it was called. It was a little 2-seater Ford, and it was a crap car. I hated this car, but I had bought it when I was drunk. I bought it right off the showroom floor because I thought it looked cool. It had a red vinyl interior and a black outside. And I thought this was the coolest car. And I remember driving it out of the showroom after I bought it. And as soon as I get on the highway, it's noisy and it was slow. And it was like, and I was a dope. I just bought it without even test driving the thing because I was drinking and I didn't care. So I hated this car. So I'm driving this car that I hate. And I feel like, my mind is just disintegrating. And I think, I know my problem. I'm going crazy. So I went actually over to where my brother was living with my dad, who was dying of alcoholism. And my brother was actually still working for the band that had kicked me out. He was their roadie and light man. And so, it's 9 o'clock in the morning or whatever. He's still sleeping. And I went over there because I didn't want to go home and deal with my roommate. So I went to my father's apartment. And I start calling mental health places. And I was describing my situation. I said, I need help. I'm going crazy. And they said, well, do you drink? I said, yeah, I drink a little bit. Well, drink here, drink there. Do you do drugs? Well, a little cocaine when I can afford it. Well, call this other number. So I called another number and they said, do you drink? I said, yeah, I kind of drink. Do you? Yeah, I do. we'll call this other. And by the time I got to the third or fourth person, they said, "Do you drink?" And I said, "Yeah, I drink about 1.5 quarts of vodka a day." And they said, "Okay, you need to come and see us. We have we're gonna take care of you, but don't drive. Get some. Did you have a drink today?" I said, "Yeah, I sure did." They said, "Get somebody to drive you." So I had to go wake up my brother, the roadie, and convince him to take me to rehab. Now, I mentioned that denial runs deep. He's like, "Oh, why do you have to go to this place?" I said, "Because I drink a lot." He goes, "Well, yeah, I mean, I know you drink, but how much do you drink?" This is my own brother, and I managed to fool him, and he had no
Wow.
idea how much I was drinking. So, because I was at my father's place, when I went over to see my dad, he had his own vodka supply, so I couldn't drink his vodka because he'd know. So I had to bring my own vodka, but I had to hide it around the house. So I said, "Come with me." And I showed him in my dad's apartment where I hid all my vodka bottles. And he was like, "Well, what are you doing that for?" I said, "Because, I need my vodka." And he goes, "Well, I mean, really, how bad is it?" I said, "Come here." And I took him into his own room. And I said, "Look under the bed." And the bed was where I used to put my empties. So he looks under the bed, and there's like 30 empty vodka bottles there.
Oh, wow.
And he looks at me and he says, "I guess you do have a problem. Let's go."
Mm.
And so he put me into his red Plymouth Duster with a black vinyl roof, and he puts on a song. The song he comes in, I kid you not, it's like the soundtrack of my life. He puts on a song by the Kinks called "State of Confusion." And the song starts with this heavy guitar, and Ray Davies screams at the top of his lungs and then starts singing about being in a state of confusion. And guess what state I was in? I was just sitting there like, and this
Yeah.
song is, "We're in a state of confusion." And I'm sitting here, and my brother's driving me to rehab. And I thought, this is the end of the world. Instead, it was the beginning of a whole new life.
Yeah. Now, if I'm correct after my research, um, Subway allowed you to come back, right? After they worked with you being in treatment?
I always credit Fred DeLuca, the founder and owner of Subway, with giving me a second chance.
Yeah.
But and it's funny because I've said this. I think I even said this on Undercover Boss. I said he gave me a second chance, but he really gave me a third chance,
Really?
because the second chance he gave me was to take this former rock star who came in and interviewed with him. When I interviewed with him, I'm dressed in orange clothes with a skinny black tie, and I'm wearing orange shoes with like 3-inch platform heels, because that's all I had. I had my rock and roll clothes,
Yeah.
and orange hair. And guess what? He hired me.
Yeah.
He hired me. So that was my second chance, because he saved me from the rock and roll world. Then he gave me a third chance by taking me back when I came out of rehab.
So what did that look like? How long did you stay in rehab for?
It was a 28-day program. Back in those days, and they really need to get back there, that it seemed easier to get insurance to pay for inpatient rehab, 28-day program. And I needed that 28 days. It took me like 3 or 4 days to detox. I was up on the detox floor for 3 or 4 days, just lying and sweating and shaking and all that. And then they let me loose. They put me in slippers and let me go downstairs and shuffle around with the rest of the population. And while I was there, while I was there, like they put us in, we had groups and we had psychological stuff and all that. But out of all that stuff, I only remember 2 things. One was they showed us I remember the guy showed us this chart. They had this chart, and it showed a line that went up and then down and then up. And he said, well, this chart shows when you are, starting your life, you kind of grow in your life. And then, for an addict or an alcoholic, you discover your drug of choice, and that kind of gives you a boost. But then it starts turning against you, and your life kind of goes down. And it goes down, you start here, and then your life starts going down, down, down below where you were. And then you hit your bottom. And at that point, you're either in an institution, or you're out of your mind, or you're dead. Or you find recovery, and then you start to go up, and you start to go up and up and up, and you start to find a better life, and you start to live a new life, and your life gets better and better, and you end up going past wherever it was you were at your high point, and your life just gets better. And it's like this. And I'm like, bullshit. There's no way. I'm sitting here in a freaking rehab. I'm in an institution. Where's my life going to go? I'm not going to get there. And you know what? He was absolutely right. I ended up with a life beyond my wildest dreams. And then that's the one thing I remember. The second thing I remember is this guy named George showed up. He was an old guy. I mean, now I'm an old guy, but back then I was a young guy. I was in my 20s. And he said, I want to take some of you young folks, and I want to take you to a meeting. And, what kind of meeting? An AA meeting. And I'm thinking, well, an AA meeting is just a bunch of old guys sitting around, in raincoats and, stubble and, smoking cigarettes. And I was like, I don't want to go to this AA meeting. But he was such a sweet guy. He was such a nice guy. So I got into his car, and, he's driving us to a meeting. And the other people with me, there were like 4 young folks who were hanging together. Oh, there are a lot of older people there in the rehab, but we kind of hung together. So George is driving, and he says, I know, some of you are feeling confused. And I'm sitting in the back seat, and I'm thinking, I'm feeling confused. And he said, and I know, you don't know what's going on. I'm sitting in the back seat thinking, I don't know what's going on. And then I'm like, holy shit, this old guy knows what I'm thinking. How can that be? And I went to the meeting. And in that meeting, I heard other people just like George that were old. And there were other people that were younger. They were all different ages there. And when they shared, they sounded just like me. And I thought nobody thought the way I did. I thought nobody felt the way I did. I thought I was completely alone in the world. I thought I was completely alone with my thoughts. I thought I was completely alone and isolated. And here I am at this meeting, this 12-step program, and there are people here just like me. Maybe there is a place where I belong after all, that I can live without drugs and alcohol.
Yeah.
And when I got out of rehab, 28 days later, first place I went was an AA meeting. And the second place and the third place, because they let me out on a Friday night. And here I am, a young single guy. Where am I going to go on a Friday night? I knew where I usually went on a Friday night. But, so I went to the happy hour meeting at 5:30. Then I went to another meeting at 7. Then I went to another meeting at 8:30. And so I stayed sober going to meetings. And eventually, in practicing a 12-step program, I got that thing that they talked about in the rehab, where my life just got better and better and better. Subway started to grow. My responsibilities grew. And I ended up a very successful business guy. And I literally traveled the world for Subway. I traveled, to Asia, to Europe, to the Middle East, the African continent, you name it. I've been there. It's kind of cool. And I thought I was a failure.
It's crazy what recovery brings you. Like, it's crazy if you just sit back and think about it, and everybody's level of success is different, but you went from being an alcoholic that was, in a rock band that got kicked out to being, the CDO of Subway, like how how did all that just come about? Like, it's insane because it's like, here you are, you think it's the end of the world, not once, but twice. And then all of a sudden, you just surrender, because the key word is surrender there. You surrender your life and you just accept it. And then you become very, very successful person.
Exactly.
How did becoming such a successful person at Subway, how did that come about?
So, in terms of my opportunity to grow within Subway, recovery really had a lot to do with it. Early on, I put together a, one of the things about getting sober, and I've seen this with so many folks, and it's certainly true with me. We get the idea that, wow, we've discovered this new thing, and everybody's got to have this, which is a good thing because that's what we do. We help other people. We get sober. We do this together. We get sober together. We don't do this in isolation. We can't do it alone. I know I can't do it alone. I cannot be sober by myself. I need help. I need the help of other folks. And the thing is that with the things I've learned in the program, I wanted to share this with everybody. So I took kind of the 12 steps and took a lot of the things I had learned through the program, and I started doing this. I guess it was sort of a presentation, where people would come into a conference room, and I talk about finding spirituality in the workplace, the spiritual aspect of the program. And it wasn't about religion, and it wasn't, it was about how to have a better day every day. And so basically, it was really taking the principles, just like it says in the 12th step of Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous and any Anonymous, to practice these principles in all of our affairs. So I started practicing the principles, and I wanted to teach them to other folks. So what that did for me was it got me to practice the principles and to ingrain them in my life. And I started utilizing them in the workplace so that when I got into a management position and I started to work with folks, instead of using the tried and true model of, bossing people around, I said, well, no, we're in this together. The only way I can be successful is for the people that work with me and for me to be successful. So we need to work together on things. And it's really understanding that just because I'm a boss, whether I was the sales manager, I was the development director, or I was the chief development officer, whatever position I had in the company, I had to remember that I'm just another bozo on the bus. I'm just like everybody else. I'm not above anybody, nor am I below anybody. Even though I've got a position and a title, I really need other folks to do a great job and to feel good about themselves. And that will help me to feel good about myself. And that way we can all feel good about what we're doing. Which isn't to say that, you still have to use some of the management techniques too, but I tried to incorporate those principles with the management techniques. And that helped me to grow in the company, because every time Fred DeLuca would come to me and say, hey, would you like to become the director of development? I said, yes. And even though I didn't, well, gee, what am I going to, I have to oversee all of development, which was, that included real estate, that included restaurant design, that included franchise sales. There were a number of aspects to that non-traditional development. Working with companies like Walmart, I'm like, wait a minute. I play rock and roll. What do I know about this stuff? But I learned because I said yes, and I took the opportunity. And recovery taught me that. And it gave me enough confidence in myself to say yes when opportunities were offered. And each time I grew a little bit more and a little bit more. And I had to stay open to the opportunities, but I also had to stay open to learning. I believe that if we're going to be successful in our sobriety, we have to be eternal students. We have to listen. Every day, every time I go to a meeting, I hear something that I need, and I get to learn something over again. And for me, for a very stubborn alcoholic or a person with substance use disorder, or however you want to say it, this brain needs, this skull is pretty hard, and you got to force the ideas in there sometimes. So sometimes I have to hear things 100 times before it really becomes part of me. But each time I did that, I was able to go a little bit further and go a little bit further, so that by the time I ended up on national television talking about my recovery, I was in a position of, what they call the C-suite, right? I was a chief development officer, and I was, pretty high up in the organizational structure, but yet I could remember where I came from. And that's what I tried to share, especially when I worked with the folks on Undercover Boss. Because if you watch that episode, I worked with Ephraim, who was a guy who was, had been dealing with, he was going to go into a gang. He ended up being adopted by a very wonderful woman, and he ended up growing. And today he's got his own podcast, and he and I are going to be doing some speaking engagements coming up. Awesome. There was Reverend Dwayne, who was running a church, running a subway that was inside of a church, and he wanted to open his own church. And I saw his vision, what it was he wanted to accomplish on the spiritual plane. There was Sherry, the subway lady, who was just in love with her customers, and she taught me what it's like to just care about strangers, which I learned that in AA to a degree because, I cared about my fellow alcoholic, but there are also the rest of the people out there. And she taught me how to learn, how to really care about a customer. And I was able to bring that into Subway and make that part of our customer service abilities. And then there was Jessie. And Jessie she was 17 years old, and she was tough. I mean, she really, she read me the riot act, right? She really took me down a few pegs because I was joking around a lot during the course of this thing. And Jessie took her job very seriously, and she didn't care about the TV thing to the point where at one point, she said, look, there was a line out the door, and here I am fumbling around. And she said, stop the cameras, and you go in the back and wash dishes. So, of course, the cameras followed me in to wash dishes, but there were no more cameras out in the store because she didn't want them there because she wanted to take care of the customers, rather than focus on being on TV. And she ended up, we talked a lot about her dad, and her dad, bless his soul, passed away a few years ago. But I've been in touch with all these folks ever since we did that show.
I was going to ask that.
We've stayed connected, and it's just wonderful to see where they've gone in their lives. And it's about connection. Just
Yeah.
like I was saying about the Phoenix is about connection. I
Yeah.
think AA or recovery programs, 12-step programs are about connections. Yeah, it's about the 12 steps, but the 12 steps are really about we. It starts out, we admitted we were powerless over whatever.
Right.
And that operative word is we. So it's always about the connection. And I've connected with so many people, and I've got so many friends literally around the world in Subway, in recovery, even old friends that I thought saw me as a failure. Those folks from college, those WNHU folks, that where I was in the blackout with at the 10-year anniversary. We just had, believe it or not, on June 4th, a 50-year anniversary of when we went on the air with
Wow.
WNHU, and a lot of those same people were there. And it's so funny that after all these years, we're closer than ever. And for me, recovery made that possible.
What about the other bandmates from the Cransies? You're in communication with them, or
I am. I don't. So here's some sad news, and I believe I mentioned this to you because it's kind of a tough time that we're kind of going through right now. That my mother-in-law passed away last
yeah.
week,
Sorry to hear
and
that.
she was an executive vice president at Subway. That's where I met her, and through her I met her daughter, who I ended up marrying, obviously, and having
Mhm.
two wonderful kids with. My wife Betsy, my son Dawson, and my daughter Caroline. Um, because of my connection with her, my mother-in-law, I have this wonderful family today, this beautiful family. So I owe that to her, among many other things. She also mentored me in my early days at Subway when I was this, washed up rock and roller, and I didn't know anything about the business world. And she taught me some stuff. But anyway, she passed away last week, and the guy who's we're going to sell her house. She has this big old house in Milford, Connecticut, and the guy who's selling the house was the drummer for the Crayons.
Okay. That's
See how that all
interesting.
comes? See
Yeah,
how
it's
everything's connected, right?
a small world, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but no, that's really cool though that, like you said, you thought just from being assuming that you're a failure to just all of the relationships and the thing, making the amends and different things, throughout our recovery. Like for me, the biggest thing for me was making amends, like just that was huge for me, and it was just like I remember even just a job. Yeah, I lost a really, really good job to me being an addict. And um I made my amends after about a year sober, and after like 3 years, I ended up going back and working for them. But it was just like it was like the most amazing thing in the world because like I was a low life junkie and I had a second chance, and people saw me as a human. They saw me for who I am and not for what I was at that time.
And that's beautiful because now you've taken that and you're spreading that to others through the
Absolutely.
blacklist.
And that's why we do this. We do this to show people like, from all walks of life, from the 9 to 5ers to people such as yourself, that have been successful in the business world, in the corporate world and whatnot. And we want people to know that like addiction and mental health and all that, it affects everybody. And if we can do it, so can they, anybody that's listening and watching and whatnot. Like there is hope. It's not you don't have to be stuck in that constant cycle.
When you were looking at my stuff, I don't know if you saw this, but there's a video there. There was a documentary called The Anonymous People. And Greg Williams, the director of that, had also reached out to me after I did the Undercover Boss episode. And so we shot a segment for The Anonymous People that ended up, it wasn't actually in the film itself, it was in like the extras. but it's also online because it's kind of an important story. And here's the story. When I did the Undercover Boss, there was this guy named Harold Andrew. And Harold was watching TV that night. Harold had been clean for 2 weeks, but very shaky. And he was just wanting a beer really bad. And he was also had those same feelings that I was talking about of isolation and failure. And he had been in the IT industry, but he had a felony on his record, I think a DUI. And he was sitting there feeling hopeless. And he said, I'm never going to be able to get a job. So what's the point? I might as well go out and have a beer. And he's thinking about going out the door and having a beer, and the TV happens to be on. And my show happened to come on. My segment came on. It was a football game had gone into overtime and then went a little bit into when the show was supposed to start. So all of a sudden the show just came on, right? He was watching a football game and the show came on. So the show's on in the background and he's looking at the door and thinking about going out for a beer. And all of a sudden I start talking about having a meltdown in the office and getting into recovery. And he's listening to this and he's like, this guy is the chief development officer of the largest fast food chain in the world. And he has felt exactly the way I feel. And he's been where I've been and look where he is today. So if he can get to there, I can at least get a job. And it gave him hope. And the next day, the show aired on a Sunday, and the next Monday, I get an email from Harold. And Harold said, I saw you on, and he told me that story, about how he had been feeling, and he thanked me in such a beautiful way. He said, look, I don't want anything from you. I just want to thank you for telling your story because it gave me hope. And I sent him a nice message back. And then, in the back of my mind, I said to a couple of people, that one message meant everything to me. I was so glad I had done the show just because of what Harold said. But then Greg, I was going to say Greg Williams comes along and he's doing this documentary for the anonymous people. And now it's 2 years later. And I tell him the Harold story. And he said, we're going to find Harold. And he brings his film crew and they go on a plane to Indiana and they find Harold. And Harold has now been 2 years sober and he has a job in the IT industry. And he shared his story and he started crying and it was beautiful. So it had, the little segment had me reading Harold's letter and then Harold reading Harold's letter. And then when they were getting ready to release that film, the folks from CBS called up and they said, we're going to do something called Epic Bosses and kind of like a where are they now and what impact it happened as a result of you being on Undercover Boss. So I told them about Harold. And guess what they did? They flew Harold from Indiana up to Connecticut and had us meet in person. And
that's awesome.
And share with each other. And then the last thing we did was we walked into a theater right there. We were up in Hartford, Connecticut. We walk into this theater where they're having the premiere of The Anonymous People. And we go up on stage and we tell our story and they show the film of the two of us,
Wow.
And it was just a beautiful moment. And Harold right now, he's suffering. He's got a form of cancer, and he's got another challenge ahead of him. But now he's still sober, and that moment counted. Every moment counts.
Yeah. Wow. Well, see, and just to think, if you never did the show, which I was going to come up and just say, like How did that come about? Like, were you nervous to do it? How did, instead of Fred doing it, how come you did it?
It was one of those things. So we're sitting at a meeting, right? Uh, it was a meeting of, a management meeting. The managers and the marketing guy comes in, and the head of marketing said, "Hey, I just got a call from Studio Lambert. That's the company that produces the Undercover Boss, and then they sell it to CBS. Studio Lambert just called, and I've worked with them before, and they want us to be on their show Undercover Boss. They're in their second season now, and they wanted to have a bigger company. So what do you say, Fred? You want to be on Undercover Boss?" And I happened to be sitting with Fred at the time, and Fred said, "No, because number one, everybody in Subway knows who I am, and
Yeah.
number two, I don't have time to go do that." And he turns and he looks at me and he goes, "Have Don do it." So next thing I know, I've got I'm growing a beard and I got
Yeah.
cameras running all around after me, and honestly, it wasn't. I was comfortable because I had very important training. I had been in the crayons.
Hmm.
And what was interesting in the crayons, when I had the right amount of liquid courage,
Yeah.
the thing about in the crayons, I was the bass player. Bass players, we have big, thick strings on those bass guitars, and so you don't ever have to tune. So the other guys would turn around and tune their guitars, and I'm standing there looking at the audience, and they're just like looking up at me, and I'm looking down at them. So one day I go up to the mic and I start talking. So then I'd start chatting with the crowd in between songs, and then I start telling jokes, and then I start, and I start doing this whole entertainment thing, and I
Hmm.
turned it into a whole shtick. And so when I went to work at Subway, I ended up being the MC at the conventions. We'd have like 3,000 or 4,000 people at a convention. And I had my own talk show called Subway Today. And I'd host the talk show. And, I was like Johnny Carson or, Jimmy Fallon. I'd be there, I'd be, doing my talk show, and I'd interview the execs from the company and tell jokes and all that kind of stuff. So I was very comfortable in front of a camera and a crowd, so that really wasn't a problem for me.
Okay, so you I guess you're right. You had that training. No, but it's cool, because at the end of the day, is exactly what we're talking about. Is just from you doing that show opened up so many things for other people. Harold, and then of course with the employees that you met and whatnot. And it's just like, I bet you never in your life did you imagine when you were a hopeless rock and roll musician that you would ever be the person that you are today.
Absolutely. It's a life, as we say, beyond my wildest dreams. It's really been beautiful that I've been able to rise, recover, and
Yeah.
live, as we say at the Phoenix. And honestly, I can't say that it was me, but the fact that I met the folks at Phoenix and they were just in Denver and now they're all over the country. And one
Right.
of the things I had suggested was, well, why don't we make this very simple and let's follow the Subway formula and go back to how Scott Strode had started the Phoenix, which was just him and somebody else and a couple of bikes riding around and talking with each other and keeping each other sober. Let's go back to that model and do volunteers. And guess what? We're all over the country now. So, that could very well have happened without me, but at least I had an opportunity to give some input to that, and
Yeah.
that wouldn't have happened. So each one of these things, one thing leads to another thing to another
Yeah.
thing, but it doesn't happen unless we show up. First of all, we find recovery, and then we show up and share with somebody else,
Yeah.
whether it's one person like Harold or 15 million people on Undercover Boss.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, why don't you let everybody know where we can find the Phoenix at? I will go ahead. Any links we can put in the description when this airs. But where can we find the Phoenix?
Sure, I can send you links, but the www thephoenix.org. So it's the Phoenix. And also in the App Store, wherever apps are, there's a free app. Just download the Phoenix app, and and on the app, it's so cool because you get a chance to, really connect with folks right away. You don't really have to do anything. All you have to do is connect. I've got the Phoenix app right there on my phone, and it's free, and you download it, and all you have to do is go to a virtual event or any event, which I know you're going to go to the songwriting workshop on Tuesday, and it's it's a great opportunity to connect with other folks, and really, I love the Phoenix dearly. I love the people at the Phoenix. I love the Blacklist. I love even the Phoenix. We have a podcast too.
I saw that.
I don't want to take listeners away from you, but actually, I think everybody should listen to every recovery podcast.
Absolutely, we're no competition at all.
Or Rise, Recover, Live. There's some great podcasts out there, and if you listen to my podcast on Rise, Recover, Live, you'll probably hear some of the same stories.
But
anyway,
maybe one day I can be on yours. So
it's all good. Yeah, that would be cool.
Yeah. Oh, all right. We're going to wrap it up. Thank you so much, Don, for coming on. Thanks for sharing a little bit of your time with us tonight. For anybody that is reaching out or that is watching, listening, there's hope. There's hope. And you can either reach out to the Phoenix, reach out to Don. You can reach out to myself. You have one last thing you want to tell the people that are searching?
Basically, recovery is possible, and with recovery, anything is possible. And guess what? You only have to do it today, one day at a time.
Yep. Even though it's so cliche, one day at a time that's literally, I got it tattooed on me. Literally one day at a time, because that's all it is. One day, one moment.
Awesome.
So, all right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in with us today. Go show Don some love, follow the Phoenix, and until next time, thank you guys. We love you.